We're going to move on to our second match of the day, I believe, which is going to be che0nsu up against Kin. Kin, obviously, our newest Grandmaster, in addition to Possessi, joining us in the Asia-Pacific region. A very strong player from Hong Kong, who you've known for quite a long while, despite the fact that he may not have been that well known in the Hearthstone scene.
Yeah, he was definitely in that sort of OG group of Hong Kong players, along with Blitzchung and Yolsik. That group have been around for a long time, and Shai as well, attending a lot of the APAC tour stops back in the 2017-2018 circuit. And Kin had his big breakout by winning the Asian Games, the first ever, event where esports was held at an Olympic-style event. He got the gold medal there, and I guess went a bit on the DL for a bit after that, but then came back with a really strong performance in the Masters Tours. And finally, I think very deservedly, has a spot here in APAC GM.
I would definitely agree. It's very nice to have some new faces here in the Asia-Pacific Grandmasters scene. I think it's one of the regions that could do with a little bit of a shake-up. I feel like last year, in some of the points, Asia-Pacific was lagging behind a little bit in terms of the metagame. If you remember when a Combo Priest was the scourge of ladder, and it was all but dominating the European and America's Grandmasters, it took a little while for us in Asia-Pacific for the players to catch up. But now it feels like they're definitely, with Kin and Possessi joining the ranks, much more bolstered and ready to fight with the best of them. And heading into our first game, your eyes did not deceive you on that first screen. It is, in fact, going to be a Priest mirror to start things off. Not something that I was expecting to see, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, sit back for a long one, guys. This is not the combo Priest mirror that we pampered you with last year. All nice and fast and straightforward. This Res Priest versus Res Priest, this one can go to fatigue. So,
yeah. So, we call it Res Priest. Res Priest has been around for quite a long time now, Gia. What is the most current iteration of Resurrection Priest doing? What is its game plan in any matchup?
I would say it's quite similar to how it was before, which is generally against aggro decks, use your very efficient removals with the recent buffs to Priest, now Shadow Word Death costs 2, and even old cards that are unchanged, like Penance, Holy Nova now buffed, get rid of all of their early stuff, and then you start dropping your threats like Convincing Infiltrator. And then eventually you can revive them with Psychopomp and eventually Mass Resurrection, and now Katrina Muerte. And there's even more value being generated by cards like Skeletal Dragon and removal in the form of Soul Mirror, kind of taking the place of Mass Hysteria, which is now rotated.
Yeah, I guess the really interesting thing for me, in addition to, like you said, the usual suite of resurrection tools that you're seeing in the late game, is a Galakrond, but no Galakrond helping cards. There's none of the invoke cards in there. Will be taking effect of the get a random priest minion. It's just straight up Galakrond on its own, I believe, in both of these deck lists, which obviously is okay on the turn you play it. Destroy a minion for 7 mana. It's obviously pretty drastically overpriced, but it's really that hero power that they want to switch over to, which I would have to imagine in this particular matchup, which, like you said, can get very fatiguey, will be very important.
It's true, and that's why you see Kin keep it straight up here, because you want to be pressing that hero power every single turn, getting the high value priest spells such as Thought Steal, anything that generates more stuff in your hand to then translate into threats on board or removal for your opponent's threats. So both Kin and che0nsu finished 5-2 after Swiss, same as Surrender, but a slightly lower seeding due to the tiebreakers. Both very impressive records. And yeah, I assume this Priest was a big reason for them making it so far. Priest has been kind of climbing a bit more in popularity and ladder because Breath of the Infinite has such a good effect against the type of boards that Demon Hunter likes to build.
Really true. And it's an interesting dynamic that we have here between these two players with this specific style of matchup, because despite the fact that, che0nsu is the more well-known player, he's been in Grandmasters for a full year so far, I'm not exactly sure how he's going to approach this kind of matchup, because for the majority of last year, it was not particularly slow control-y decks that people were playing. It was mainly Rogue was very powerful for a while, or Combo Priest was very powerful for a long while. Those kind of more aggressive decks we were seeing a lot more. Whereas Kin, in his final up against Eddie in Masters Tour Bucharest, we got to see a whole lot of this exact style of matchup. And Kin, in my opinion, looked very confident indeed. It feels like this is the kind of matchup he knows best.
Yeah, I can definitely say that Kin is comfortable taking games one turn at a time and trying to make sure that the fatigue literally doesn't get to him. And I would like to point out the interesting interaction between Bad Luck Albatross and the opponents in this matchup, because if you're considering fatigue, it really slows down your opponent's fatigue, but at some point they will draw those 1/1s, and they don't want to play them because they would eventually enter the res pool, which is a huge blow to the total value you have in your deck if you resurrect one of those 1/1s. So I'm not actually sure how early you're meant to play the Albatross or how late, but I guess early means that it can clog up their hand earlier and maybe prevent them from rezzing the good stuff, rather than they've used both resurrect and then they play with 1/1s.
And the other thing to bear in mind in this matchup is it's not like two Peanut Shamans going up against each other. If you're familiar with Viper's deck, which is a Shaman deck that runs basically no threats at all. It's a pure fatigue deck. You know, these run threats. The whole point of Resurrect Priest is it can play these big bombs and resurrect them time and time again. They're not especially aggressively statted minions. They are mainly to just stall out the aggro 100%. But if you are drawing Albatross turn after turn after turn, eventually you're going to die because you're just not going to have the resources that you need to survive against your opponent's large minions.
It's very true. When I was talking about the fatigue matchup, that is assuming a world where both players do hit their essential cards, which is, you know, these taunt minions that you do want to resurrect, and the mass resurrects, and the unconditional removal in Plague of Death. There is a world where one person just hits their mass resurrect, the opponent doesn't have the Plague of Death to deal with it, or they don't have the mass resurrect to stall. But the difference between this matchup and the token druid, you know, with decks like to play one spell to build a massive board, the difference is that the responding with the same spell here in the priest mirror can actually stall that board because these minions revived have taunt, versus in the druid matchup, you can kind of ignore them if you built your board first and go face.
Yeah, you definitely can't be ignoring any of these minions. But it's kind of an interesting dynamic we've got now. Kin could very well just throw down his Galakron on this turn. Looks like a pretty decent opportunity too. I don't think that there's any particular reason to hold on to the Priest hero power to get value healing up minions. It's obviously nice, but I think more valuable is to start spamming that hero power and get as much value out of it while you can.
I do agree, but it seems like Kin is going for a different approach here, maybe trying to get a better target to remove with the Galakron, because I guess sometimes it's a premium to be able to actually trade off something on board and have minions stay alive. But I actually did like seeing the I would have liked to see the Galakron there because he kept it in the opening hand. That's kind of what it's for.
Yeah. And, you know, to be fair, I defer to Kin on matters such as this. I have not played Res Priest in its most recent iteration, so I think he almost certainly knows the deck far better than I do. And Galakron, you know, while it is only removing one minion off the board, it is still a removal piece that you can use later on in the game. He had the ability to kill off the Convincing Infiltrator, so I guess he thought, you know what, let's use this while I can, use my minions as removal pieces, and then go for the Galakron later on when it's more necessary.
Right, and now he has the possibility to coin it alongside a Penance to remove the... Oh, I guess not. He is holding onto it for some time.
Okay, this is kind of clever.
Yeah.
This is cute more than anything else, I'd say.
Kill off his own Infiltrator to guaranteed remove the Katrina. So I guess from this we can tell that Kin is trying to make sure he gets a premium minion to remove from the Galakron. I was thinking though that on the previous turn he could just Penance double trade to get rid of the Infiltrator. There's a 50-50 that his own Infiltrator dies then kills Katrina, and if he misses the 50-50 he could then go for Galakron.
Thing is though, this was far and away the most powerful thing that che0nsu could do. Like, his board is incredibly powerful, but what he hasn't done is match it to his opponent's side. Because one of the things that has traditionally been very powerful in control matchups, Priest specifically, is because of the fact that almost all removals are symmetrical, it clears both sides of the board. You want to try and play a big board when your opponent has a big board, so they don't want to throw down the big removals. But here for Kin, this is the easiest Plague of Death of his life.
It is, and che0nsu, I mean, he all-in that turn very quickly, knowing that in hand he does not have big refill spells of Mass Resurrection available yet. Well, it could be if he decides to play this Renew, but maybe he was just hoping to like cheese out a win. If Kin didn't have the Plague of Death there, it was certainly looking very bad for him.
Yeah. Shadow Madness. Yeah, I was going to say Thought Steal, you just snap it straight away because it's the highest value, but Shadow Madness does have some pretty good targets in the deck. Obviously a Cartoot, Convincing Infiltrators, anything like that. But I think he'll probably be pretty happy he went for the Thought Steal.
Yeah, another Katrina. And maybe we are starting to learn something about why Kin has been saving this Galakrond a bit. Just single target removal is... there's a lot more of it in the Priest deck than the Mass removal, but it's very conditional, right? Penance, Shadow Word, Pain, or Death, if either of them are in the list.
Yeah.
Wow.
And again, this is just what I mean about trying to not necessarily massively dominate the board, but try and match your opponent at all points. Because Kin here, you know, che0nsu doesn't have an especially massive board here, but he's got something in play. He just played 2 cards from his hand, which means if he wants to Plague of Death, he has to silence one of his albatrosses here and basically just deny himself the death rattle of what could be a very powerful effect.
I also want to note that we were, very excited about the Katrina off of the Thought Steal, but that Mass Dispel could potentially be very pivotal as well, because Kin does run that in his deck, but che0nsu does not. So this is something that Kin will not expect to see from the other side. If it does come to that point where che0nsu builds a board, Kin's best answer is to his own board of taunts, it could just suddenly be ignored.
So for Kin, if we're going in keeping with his game plan, well, I was going to say maybe we'll see the Galakrond held onto for a little bit more of a using it for removal, but he's saying, you know what, now it's time. Now it's been long enough. There's nothing, I suppose the difference being there's nothing to heal anymore, so his Priest hero power is rendered pretty much useless.
I know, I still have some questions about this. Of course, I will also defer to Kin and not in any game that Katrina to Katrina.
Wow.
That what we were suggesting is correct, but I do wonder, wouldn't he rather have had a bunch of extra spells than maybe preserving some minions for just a turn longer? Anyway, he's got that's Grave Ruin in hand. I thought it was Shadow Word Ruin for a second. So Katrinas are a massive problem.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. 1 Plague of Death gone. Obviously, 1's still in the deck, but that's not very helpful to him at the moment. Maybe he just sees what he gets off the hero power.
He is throwing 1 Albatross into the res pool. I believe he's only played 1 Mass Res, so that has a small chance of messing with the second one potentially, but that is the least of Kin's problems. He's got to discover a way to deal with these Katrinas. He technically had a way to deal with one of them, but it was extremely expensive. And if you leave 1 Katrina up, it's basically a threat on its own, so I like having held back the penances.
Yeah. And you know what? To be fair to che0nsu, I don't know. Again, I'm learning this matchup as we go through it, because I haven't seen a mirror between the 2 most recent iterations of Res Priest. But while I criticized him earlier for throwing his most powerful turns down too quickly, that did bait out a Plague of Death. And even though he couldn't have relied on the fact that Katrina would summon Katrina, which would summon Katrina, it does now mean that the Plague of Death is gone, and he may be able to win just purely on tempo.
That's crazy. Man, Kin's whole game plan is basically just trying to survive until he can remove these Katrinas. I don't think just even building a board of his own could help stall. Unless, of course, from his perspective, if everything is a convincing infiltrator that he revives. But even then, che0nsu has Mass Dispel, so it's not even Mass Resurrect as an out for Kin. It is the second Plague of Death or possibly Shadowword Ruin.
Yeah, there's like, I guess a couple of things that could help smooth the way. Like if you can get the new, what is it, Natalie Celine, that might be able to stall the game a little bit. But like you said, it's basically looking like it's got to be a AoE removal or it's just game over. First things first for che0nsu, everything goes face, then we think.
Yes. I do love that style. And the conclusion of thinking is do nothing.
Yep.
It's a turn of nothing but face. How can
I
you
often come to the same
dislike
conclusion.
that?
And I think here, it looks like Kin may just be dead. We were bigging this up as this super fatigue late game matchup, which Kin, you know, would be in the driver's seat. He's got Galakron first, you know, all the removal he needs. Turns out he's just dead.
Yeah. And no offense to Kin, but I really like that we saved a bunch of time for this. And there you go, his own Mass Dispel, closing it out. In favor of che0nsu, now we get to move on to a different matchup, maybe see how this priest can really actually work in an anti-aggro setting, which it is generally meant to do.
That's right. We'll have to see how it fares against che0nsu's other two remaining decks, which definitely look a little bit more aggressive based than what the rest of the field is. I have to imagine the Priest will have a better chance against the Druid than the Mage did, because it's got a lot more powerful removal, like the Plague of Death can be used to completely blitz the board, no matter about Soul of the Forest or not. It's just completely clear a board and then carry on with your game plan.
Mm-hmm. And looking at how the lineups are built, I'm actually quite curious how many people decided to bring Priest at all in our top 8. And I believe Rivius also has it, and he was like at the end of the first 4 rounds, one of the best performers. Of course, it did even out to a bunch of players going 5-2 in the end, but Priest sees exactly half representation among our top 8, one of them being Highlander, the one that Tom has.
That's going to be pretty interesting to see, as the matchup, the mirror between the Priest there definitely didn't go the way I was expecting. But we'll have to see how the Priest from Kin will fare against the rest of che0nsu's lineup when we come back after just this short break. Was that good? Was that right? Welcome back to Hearthstone Grandmasters. We're halfway through our second match of the day here in Asia-Pacific. We're going to have all the matches in Group A here today, getting our 2 players who will be going through to the top 4 on Sunday. And then we're going to roll straight into Europe and then straight into Americas later on today. Plenty of Hearthstone action coming up. But for now, we have to finish our series between Kin, our brand new Grandmaster, not a grand new Grandmaster, up against che0nsu. And it is a 1-0 up to che0nsu here in our first game, which was a pretty explosive Priest mirror.
It was, and we just got the information in that Kin actually banned away not Demon Hunter from che0nsu, but Warrior, which I guess gives some insight as to his strategy of maybe trying to target other Demon Hunters a bit more. I would say the Priest has a decent matchup, so does Galakrond Warlock, but he's also got Mage, and I've seen some tweets from you, Derek, saying that you would definitely not like to play that matchup from the Mage side.
I've played a little bit of Mage. I mean, I was playing a lot of Mage in before rotation over to this year of the Phoenix, and it was a very different deck then. It was Scam Mage then. You know, you were just cheating out Luna's Pocket Galaxy, throwing 1-mana minions all over the board. No one stood a chance. Whereas now it feels much more like just a kind of slow, control-ish deck. Like the old version had basically taken out. I wasn't playing Blizzard. I wasn't playing Flame Strike. I wasn't playing Rolling Fireball. Whereas now all of the builds feel a lot more defensive in their builds, which definitely, I think, does not put it in a great position in the meta game. I feel like it's one of the weaker decks. And like as you said, it really struggles against Demon Hunter as well.
Right. But maybe Kin thinks that he's got the list to try and beat Demon Hunter. He is playing an Ooze in that mage, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later, as Kin is on his second try with the Priest, now against Spell Druid from che0nsu. So this matchup, it's tough to say because the Priest definitely has the tool with boards. But the thing with Druid is it draws so much towards the mid to late game that the boards are continuous. They're one after the other. So the second that the Priest actually misses one of their AoEs, like they go Holy Nova, then they don't have the stuff for Soul Mirror on 7 or something. Then the Druid can suddenly game with a single Savage or Gift of the Wild.
And that really has been one of the big problems with Priest since the start of Hearthstone, really, is, you know, they have these very powerful removal spells, but if they don't draw them at the right time, it doesn't matter, because they're just dead anyway. They need to be a little bit more proactive, which is what this Res Priest can do fairly well with its big minions it can throw down.
Right. Speaking of big minions, big plays, though, che0nsu has Kael'thas in hand. He has a bunch of 0-mana spells. So this is pretty much a ticking time bomb. And after the Kael'thas is eventually removed one way or the other, I'm hoping for Kin's sake, at the very least, that the Kael'thas gets removed. There's then the exotic bound seller, and then the Forade, eventually Soul of the Forest, like, thus requiring exactly Plague of Death to fully remove, just the way that the Mage matchup requires exactly Amazing Reno.
Apotheosis? What does that mean? I was actually just going to say it's a pretty good card here because it gets a buff, which is difficult for the Druid to deal with. But I actually have no idea what
the great thing about
means.
Casting from the comfort of our homes is that I have great access to Google. Apotheosis is the glorification of a subject to divine level, and most commonly the treatment of a human like a god. So this bad luck albatross is now a god.
I mean, it's not wrong. That's a pretty good looking albatross, I gotta say. Deific, maybe, is yet to be seen. But at the moment, it's really Kin's only hope of taking the victory as he apotheoses che0nsu all the way down to 0. But che0nsu has something to say about that in his own right. Kael'thas coming down in the next couple turns should be able to mop this up pretty effectively.
He is going to lead with the exotic Mount Seller, though, which I quite like because in terms of the big spells that he would like to play along with Kael'thas, there is Forest Aid, but maybe that is a little bit too weak to Holy Nova, whereas the exotic Mount Seller could possibly produce minions with higher health totals. Not that one, though.
Especially as I think the first thing that che0nsu wants to do with Kael'thas is overflow, which means first of all he needs to actually dump some cards. But at the moment, if he is at 7 cards now, he'll go up to 8, and then he goes Kael'thas, Coin, Innovate, Overflow. He won't overdraw. So I think he could actually just stop now and save all his 0 mana cards for a huge Kael'thas turn.
I quite like it. The only problem with this, though, is that
Yeah, I
Kin
agree.
can take the guaranteed removal on the Mount Seller after going Albatross into 1/4, Penance into
True. Yep.
the little bunny. That is pretty much his entire turn if he does that, though.
Or Holy Nova Penance, and then he gets to push 6 face. Is maybe better. I don't know.
Sure.
I guess Holy Nova is probably too valuable. You probably want to hold on to the Holy Nova.
It is in theory, but I mean, knowing that from che0nsu's perspective, he will likely avoid playing just a naked board of 2/2s without
True.
buffing them out of the range of Holy Nova. I wonder how valuable it is at that point.
Yeah. Interesting dynamic.
Soul Mirror is interesting. That has an interesting interaction with Soul of the Forest, because when you copy the enemy minions, they also have the Death Rattle attached.
Right, but the problem is that if you want to get a full board of 7 minions copied, you have to have nothing on your side of the board.
Right.
So it kind of works against Kin here, because he wants to have as many minions in play as possible.
Mm-hmm. So he does decide to save the Holy Nova and just not push the 6 damage to the face, which I can respect, because Priest, aside from this one minion sticking, probably cannot rely on having the face, the reach or the burst, and che0nsu has the overflow to kind of get a little bit healthier from here.
And much like my vegan flatmate, the first thing that che0nsu does is reach for the Kael, because it is time to go.
How many times have you used that line before? Or the better question, how long have you
Just
been waiting to use that?
Off the
for
top of my
GM?
head, Gia. Comedic genius you're working with here.
All right, I'll deal with it.
I'll deal with it, she says. Yeah. Wasted. I am wasted. Not in that way. Forest Aid coming down, though, here for che0nsu.
Right.
I imagine he's going to be able to try and get Soul of the Forest down, unless he's able to get Gift of the Wild off the top. We'll see what he gets. But I think the Soul of the Forest is just a really nice way to lock up this board against Holy Nova.
And he can stack the Power of the Wild as well. If all of the actions get through, this is getting a little scary. But, I mean, if he did get to stack the Power of the Wild, that would be very, very strong. And he did. che0nsu APM, 2 OP. Yeah, because now even the first layer survives Holy Nova, and Kin is shaking his head. If only
Soul
Kin
Mirror
had
is...
an innervate of his own, he could Soul Mirror, use the innervate, and then play another song. Like
that would be so sick.
It would.
That would be
if he had one more mana and something like Renew. But
yeah, I mean, if he'd held on to the Renew, maybe could have stalled out for a turn. But either way,
I don't think he could have, though.
Probably not. Yeah.
It's gonna be one Savage Roar to close out the game.
Is it lethal?
I assume so.
20. Yeah, I think it is. I think it might be like just 1 over with the Moonfire. But either way, I think that does just close out the game. 2-0 to che0nsu over Kin. Despite all our hyping up of our new Grandmaster, Kin is really struggling to get his teeth into this game. The Priest really not looking that powerful because, I mean, really so far, it's just being run over. Usually you think of Priest as a, maybe it doesn't have quite strong enough of a win condition, but it's very strong against the aggro decks. But maybe this is the weak spot for Priest, where it's very strong against the super aggression and maybe good against the super late game. It's this mid-range power pressure that it really struggles against.
Yeah, to be fair though, that first game was a mirror, so I would say in terms of getting run over, it could have been either side that the Priest would struggle. But now I think, if I'm correct, if you choose to leave Demon Hunter unbanned, it means you're trying to target it. So this is, I believe, what Kin is trying to beat. Definitely the Warlock and the Ooze tech in the Mage lend itself towards that, but it's going to be an uphill battle to climb. It seems like you're asking for a lot when you're trying to beat Demon Hunter 3 times in a row.
It definitely does feel that way. There's a couple of other techs thrown in there, the Frozen Shadow Weaver, as well as the Ooze in the Warlock as well. Definitely feels like he's given himself a very strong matchup against the aggro Demon Hunter that's left for che0nsu. This is one of the reasons why, again, I personally prefer the combo Demon Hunter as opposed to the aggro Demon Hunter, because not only is it better in the kind of pseudo mirror against the aggro Demon Hunter. It's a little bit better, I feel, against the Warlocks and Mages of this world. But we're going to have to see up against the Priest whether the infamous Demon Hunter that we're getting to see here will be able to overcome the consistent healing and taunt minions that can be thrown down by the Priest.
And with Demon Hunter, we always like to bring up how the mulligan is very interesting, and right away we see the full keep from che0nsu despite the Sigil Runner not being leftmost, and I think it's because he knows he's going to play Umberwing on 2, so by at least turn 3, the Sigil Runner will be able to get an extra draw. And Kin is already packing Breath of the Wild and Holy Nova in hand, and some minions to follow it up, so I think this is finally the kind of Priest game plan that he was hoping to see.
They will never catch me.
Okay, so dealing the face damage, play the Fell Wing, just Demon Hunter things.
Yeah,
Kin will be able to respond with Breath of the Infinite, but not really in that Fell Wing.
Yeah, and the important thing is here for che0nsu is that he's got a decent starting hand. You know, he's getting the pressure down at the start, but he has the follow-through. That is the main thing. This turn 4 might be a little bit weak. Okay, that's a great way to fill it out. But then turn 5, turn 6, Metamorphosis, Skull of Gul'dan, that's when things really start to ramp up.
And this really will be the test of whether Kin... I mean, my theory is that if he's bringing this Priest and leaving up Demon Hunter, he believes it is really favored for the Priest. But this is the true test, like the very good hand versus Demon Hunter with, I'd say, an above average start. So let's see exactly how it pans out. Right here, Holy Nova's too awkward. Bone Wraith doesn't feel the best to play because the 4-3 can actually take a value trade over it, but better than nothing for sure. Oh, wow. You
it's
cash
one,
it
right?
in here.
You really want to go for the Metamorphosis this turn to go for Skull of Gul'dan turn after, but I guess the curve can just be Warglaives,
you could push the
Metamorphosis
7
hero
phase.
power. Yeah.
Okay.
It's got to be worth it.
I mean, there's a question also if he wants to like save a charge and use double twin size. That's a little bit too many resources wasted, especially with Altruist in
I
hand.
agree.
So he is just going to expend 3 charges here instead. Push a ton. And Kin on the back foot, despite, you know, in theory being the matchup he wanted to see. Taking a quick look over at che0nsu's Demon Hunter list. I don't believe he's running the Silence card, so Cartoot seems like a safe play, or just a way to hang on at the very least. But Metamorphosis.
Yeah, I'm probably thinking Metamorphosis and then ping it down for 5 and then use the weapon for the 1. Push 7. The alternative being you could go Hero Power first to take out the... Well, you could take out the whole thing then, right? Because you get to attack twice.
Right. Oh, he's only got 1 charge left, though.
Right, but it still lets you attack again, right? After you attack and kill a minion, even if the weapon's destroyed.
Correct, yeah. Because he will still have the 1 health. The 1 attack, sorry. Which actually lines up really nicely. I think I would have liked to see that.
Yeah, I think... obviously, he gets a pretty powerful Altruist turn here, but I think he could have actually set up for something a bit more powerful on the following turn.
Yeah,
I guess maybe this does just set up lethal with the Metamorphosis next turn. Okay, sure, I guess it's just a more aggressive approach.
And one thing we know about che0nsu is that he does aggressive real well. So discovering, looking for something like Smite here to close out the extra damage to, alongside Holy Nova, deal with the 4-3, but not available. So that is just gonna be it for the Metamorphosis, is it? Or 1 off, is it?
Hero power first, metamorphosis, hero power again.
Right, it is exactly.
Yep, I think that's just going to do it.
Weapon damage, that is insane. A much quicker series than I expected.
Yeah, very disappointing performance there for Kin. He comes in his first series that we see on stream in Grandmasters, and he unfortunately goes down 0-3 with his Priest. It was a pretty bold bring, I suppose, to bring to the days, going with a slightly more aggressive strategy. We're seeing more of the the Warriors, Druid, Warlock, and Demon Hunter, I suppose, being the 4 main classes that we're getting from a lot of players. But he still has a chance down in the losers match up against Staz later on. And I think he'll have a real good shot there, as his controlling decks, again, will have a pretty good shot against Staz's Demon Hunter and Shaman.
Yeah. Aside from the Priest itself being a bold bring, I would say it's a very bold ban to leave up Demon Hunter. And, you go into a week, and he did end up 5-2, I believe, just sticking to the strategy of probably leaving Demon Hunter up if he left it up in this matchup. So that means that there's been a lot of games off of stream that we've not seen where the strategy probably did pan out. But obviously, a series like this is very demoralizing to go 0-3, and maybe he would be a little bit shook, so to speak, and have to rethink whether or not he really wants to be banning this Demon Hunter. So it's going to be a few more games to decide who will make it through the elimination match between Staz and Kin. And we got more Hearthstone coming up.
Yeah, let's take a look at the bracket then to see how it is shaking out, who's in the winners match and who is unfortunately down in our losers match for Asia-Pacific A. We have 3 more matches to bring you for today, for the Asia-Pacific region before we head over to Europe and then Americas. Staz and Kin will be coming up after Surrender and che0nsu, I believe, is our next match in the winners portion of the bracket, where the winner of which will obviously be going through to Sunday to fight for the first place and get the most amount of points in our first week of Swiss.
Yeah, and that is a total of 6 points, which is huge when you think about it, because if you finish in the, I believe, bottom 4 of a region, that's just 1 point. So winning the entire tournament 6 times ahead of bottom of the field, it's a huge gap, and definitely a great way to start off the season, because everybody wants to get into Division A to be in the best spot to A, avoid relegation, and B, get into the global finals.
Yeah, it is absolutely huge. We've seen, unfortunately, some players, I believe it was Frosty, who went 0-4 and 0-5 and then just dropped out of the Swiss. Really not the performance he was looking for. But then on the other side, we had Rivia starting with an incredibly impressive 4-0 day before dropping down to 5-2 later on. But before we head into our next match of the day, which I believe will be the winners match, we have to go to a quick break to sort out these players' games before we head in to our next match in Hearthstone Grandmasters.